Okay, so when it comes to tipping, my philosophy on this has really evolved, particularly in the last few years. Once I went in and did a little bit of research on the history and the culture of tipping in general. A little bit of a backstory, I used to work in the hospitality industry in several different forms. I worked as a couple of different restaurants in high school. My older sister was my guardian, and she was a waitress at the time and had been since she was a teenager. My family had just always kind of been in and out of the restaurant biz and things like that. And tipping is a huge piece of the restaurant culture. So I always was raised with, tips is a significant portion of your income. And we really relied a lot on our tips. And same thing when I started working in high school for a couple of different restaurants, I was getting like $2 or $3 an hour, and everything else was made up through tips. Then as I got older, I moved into the wedding industry. And again, it was very similar to that. A lot of my income came from tips. And when I didn't get tipped, or I didn't get tipped well, it was really a blow to my ego. It was really upsetting. I felt like, what the hell did I do wrong? So many emotional things that were tied up in the monetary as well. But also when it came to paying for things, if you've taken my money management course, my little mini course to help you better manage your income and fund your business. But I talk in there a little bit as well about how I started out working in restaurants and taking all of my tips and how I would get paid at the end of the night. They'd pay me hourly in cash. And then I would divide everything out through these envelopes. And that was how I managed my cash flow from a very young age. I would physically divide it up for different goals. And this is what would pay for this, and this is what would pay for that. It's evolved to a much more sophisticated system now as a business owner, but the concept was the same. I took the cash and I broke it up. Well, not having enough cash meant that I had to stretch things a lot further. And a lot of that, again, was depending on my tips. Then I evolved again throughout my career, and I went to cosmetology school and was learning about the salon culture and how much of the salon culture is tied to tipping. Well, throughout that evolution, working with the salon culture and educating myself, there were a lot of people who were talking about, okay, well, maybe tipping isn't what we need to be focusing on. And people were sharing their stories about how they eliminated tipping from their salons and how it grew and improved their business. And I got really interested in that. That's kind of where today's topic is going to be going. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of my personal viewpoint on tipping, how I came about that, and why I think that you can take some of this away and start applying it to your business to start having more satisfaction in your client interactions, to grow your business, to start making more money. It's no longer about how good of a job we do. I realized that I was linking a lot of my tip, and not just whether or not I got tipped, but how much I got tipped as to how good of a job I was doing. It was really hurting my self-esteem. It was hurting my ego. It was hurting my client interactions. But also tips felt like free money because, they had paid in advance. I switched to that business model years and years ago, probably about 12 or 13 years ago now. Everything was paid for upfront. So on the day of, I wasn't physically handling money anymore. Everything was already in my bank account, ready to pay me, ready to pay my bills, ready to pay any additional artists. So when people handed me an envelope and it had some cash in it, it was like, woohoo, free money. This was extra. But at the end of the day, I was still expecting it, and I was still expecting a certain amount. I'll never forget one time I was doing a wedding for a bride, and it was her and her sister and her mom and her grandma, and I think one other person. It was at this fancy hotel in downtown DC. I got there, nobody was even there yet. Nobody had even checked in. And the bride was under the assumption that they could just get there and check into their hotel room at whatever time they wanted, and not that like you can't check into a hotel room until after 10 or 11 or whatever. Most places are actually not even until like 3 or 4 o'clock technically, but sometimes they'll let you in as early as like 10 or 11 if they had somebody who checked out and the room is clean and ready to go. So meanwhile, this is like 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm the only person there. She comes way later and she's freaking out. And I had gone up to the concierge desk and was like, look, hey, I know you don't have any room for her. What can we do? Do you have an empty conference room? Let me just go in. Let me find a conference room, set everything up. I can at least get people started so that we're not running late and you and the bride can work things out. So we ended up just staying in that room. The bride thanked me profusely and was like, thank you so much for coming up with a solution and still getting everybody done on time, you know, blah, 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 all those good things. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She was so happy. And I'm like, yes, I went above and beyond. I'm going to be getting this amazing tip today, whatever. Fast forward to the end of the service. We had moved everything up to the bridal suite. Later on, I came down and I was waiting at valet for my car. And I turn and I look and my kit isn't there. And I freaked out. I thought somebody had grabbed it thinking it was their suitcase and walked off with it. So now I'm starting to panic. And then, you know, the people from behind the desk, like everybody's like looking around or whatever. And I was like, maybe I left it in the elevator. Maybe I was just so ready to get home and because things had kind of run a little bit late. And I was just done. I was just ready to go home. I hadn't gotten a tip at all. I was so upset about it. So I was like, maybe I was just really distracted. So I go back in the elevator. It's not in there. So I'm like, well, maybe I left it in the room. Like maybe I was just really that distracted. So I went all the way up to the bride's suite. Lo and behold, there was my kit. But she looked at me and she's like, oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm glad you came back. I totally forgot to give you a tip. And I was like, yes, all right, I am. I'm gonna get this really awesome tip. And she probably put some extra in it because, you know, I went and saved the day and blah, blah, blah. What does she do? She hands me a $10 bill. A $10 fucking bill. Like fancy ass hotel in DC, hair and makeup for like 4 or 5 people, early start, like save the, like all this, and she hands me $10. I almost handed it back to her, but I was gracious and I was like, oh, thank you so much. And I stuck it in my pocket and I got in the elevator and I was like, fuck this bitch. Like really, I was so offended. And then after that was really when my viewpoint on tipping started to change. So that was really that big tipping point because it had nothing to do with me. It had absolutely nothing to do with me. I did an amazing job. I definitely went above and beyond, but to her, $10. $10 was a tip. Thank you so much for listening today. If you knew this about the culture of tipping, I hope I've at least inspired you to approach things in a new way that makes your life easier and makes your business more successful. Make sure to leave me a comment with any questions that you have. Thank you so much for watching or listening to today's episode. I will see you back next week.